My name is Anthony Bloom. I'm the Executive Director of the mEducation Alliance. And it's a pleasure to join you all today and have this dialogue about a really important topic in regards to open education resources, specifically around the topic of foundational literacy and numeracy for teacher professional development and personalized learning. This is the first of a series of workshops that we'll actually be convening with our other collaborating partners. So I have Molly, Molly, you get the credit for the earliest call in as well from the EdTech Hub. Molly, thanks for joining us as well.
Happy to be here, thanks.
Pleasure. We have Maddie Cunningham from the Education Commission. Good morning, Maddie.
Good morning, thank you.
And I can no longer see your little one, Maddie, so I thought that would have been nice to have included him, but that's fine. Maybe someone.
He's just playing on the floor.
There you go. Okay. All right. So Maddie and guest as well. Yeah. Then we're fortunate to have our colleagues from, is Zeynep, are you on yet? She may be trying to get on from UNESCO, she'll call in a moment. And finally from Neil Butcher and Associates. The four organizations, just in terms of collaborating together about this important topic. Again, as I mentioned, this is the first of a series of policy dialogues and really look forward to your participation. The only thing I'm just going to say about the Education Alliance is this is in the spirit of the type of events that the mEducation Alliance convenes. We are about ecosystem building and collaborating with partners that share a common vision about the appropriate and scalable uses of technology to advance educational outcomes, particularly in lower resource contexts. So this dialogue is a perfect example of the type of organizations or activities that we like to promote in dialogue together. I'm going to leave it to my other colleagues. I'm going to briefly just introduce a few other folks just to give a little bit of stage setting for the origins of this activity. And then I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues, Neil and Kirsty from Neil Butcher and Associates, who will really be helping facilitate the dialogue today. I think we've had a few other people join. In a moment, we'll just do a round robin of introductions. But let me start with, hey, Maddie, I know that the origin of this activity started with some really important groundbreaking work that the Ed Commission had done in regards to Save Our Future. Would you like to give just a little bit of background to that? We'll then turn it over to Taskeen to talk about the EdTech Hub's role and relationship, and finally with UNESCO, with Zeynep to give a little bit of overview about the prior OER work. So over to you, Maddie.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Tony, and we're really happy to be here. So in the wake of the COVID crisis last summer, the Education Commission really spearheaded a campaign of major education players, as well as a bunch of over 600 CSOs and other actors, really including UNESCO and the EdTech Hub, as well as many others. So one of the idea of this work was to really think through how the education sector needed to be totally transformed in the wake of the COVID crisis, transformed and built back better. We looked at this kind of from the whole spectrum of it, from things like OERs, as well as to how to finance all of the recommendations that we're putting in. Sorry, my computer had a strange thing for a second. The EdTech Hub was really crucial in helping us think through the OER piece of this. So thank you to the EdTech Hub colleagues here. And one of the key recommendations we had coming out of this paper was to think through, to add more research, but also it was a call to action about how OERs need to be used both for teacher professional development as well as the personalized and adaptive learning. As a follow-up to the Save Our Future campaign, the Global Education Forum that is convened, the Education Commission hosts the GEF Secretariat. One of the recommendations we put on the table in the April meeting, sorry if you can hear Ian in the background, was a big call to start financing high quality OERs, especially with an eye of reaching the most marginalized, which is something that we're also quite concerned about. So that's kind of an overview of what we've been doing with this. And I hope that was helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't feel free to send me a chat or anything as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. Taskeen, do you want to just weigh in a little bit from the EdTech Hub point of view at OER?
Thanks, Tony. So hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Taskeen Adam from the EdTech Hub. And I'm actually really thrilled that we finally have the opportunity to talk about open educational resources at this policy level. So as Maddie mentioned, this topic really is quite central to the work of the Hub, and it's actually infused across various different initiatives that we work on. And at the hub, we're really trying to look at how OERs can, or we're researching and investigating how OERs can be used effectively at the national level. Firstly, to help reduce costs, but also to help improve the quality of resources that are available for teachers and learners. So just looking at some of the things that we look into, it will be first looking at creating and curating OERs that can be contextually relevant, that can be curriculum aligned, and that can also fit in and sync in with the mapping and the vetting and the quality assurance processes that are already set up within countries. So we're really looking forward to discussing that today. And as many of you know, the EdTech Hub works across various different ministries in different countries in Africa and in South Asia. And today we've invited distinguished ministry officials and experts from Ghana, Tanzania, and Zanzibar, Sierra Leone, Kenya. And we really want to bring everyone together today to have a cross-learning dialogue. And with some of you, like those at the TSC in Sierra Leone, we have, quite a long relationship going on now. In others like Ghana with Minister CENDLOS, we're looking forward to developing further relationships with you as we go on into the new year. So that's all to say, we're really looking forward to having the space where we can learn from each other and from the lessons that each country has within the OER space. So Tony, back to you.
Okay, and then finally, turn over just briefly, Zeynep, just to give a little bit of overview from UNESCO. Then we'll just go quickly to introductions of participants and then turn it over to Neil and Kirsty to start the dialogue. Zeynep, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony. So it's a great honor to be here with you today. My name is Zeynep Varoglu. I'm the program specialist at UNESCO, who's responsible for supporting the implementation of the OER recommendation and working with the different stakeholders in this area. As you know, we have UNESCO, which is an intergovernmental agency and a specialized agency of the UN based in Paris, had a recommendation, which means it's a normative instrument, the only normative instrument in the UN on open educational resources. This instrument looks at OER in 5 main areas. The first one is capacity building. The second is policy. The third one is inclusiveness, accessibility, and multilingualism. The fourth is sustainability issues. And the fifth is international cooperation in all the first 4. And this meeting is very important. It falls within the policy action area. And I think what's important to bring up here is that policy is a very catchy word, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people. And it has some of its interpretations are sometimes based on things that everybody's not talking about the same thing when they talk about policy. So I think it's a really important point. One of the points that came out of the policy discussions and in the recommendation is the fact that it can be something which is at a national level, at institutional level. It's about policy that touches on the other aspects of the recommendation. So doesn't happen in a silo. And to be quite frank, there is a power element to this, which is not innocent. So I think this discussion is going to be very interesting, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak.
Thanks, Zeynep. All right, so let's just quickly, thank you for my co-host for this as well, and I really appreciate working on this. Let's do just a round robin of interview or brief intros with our attendees that are joining us from the respective countries. I'm going to start with Nana. Would you like to introduce yourself from Ghana?
All right. Good morning, everyone. And my name is Nana Gyamfi Adwabour. I am the director of CENDLOS, and CENDLOS is Center for National Distance Learning and Open Schooling. Our mandate is to regulate, advise, and package educational content online for the people of Ghana. I've been here for quite some time, and I am happy to be here to join this noble platform for us to discuss open educational resources. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Nana. It's Thank you for joining us. I know our colleague John Kimotho was called away and will be joining us late from Kenya. So let's turn over to our colleagues from Sierra Leone. I'll start with Dr. Allie, and then if Gloria is there, then Baimaro, then Ezekiel. So let's start with Dr. Allie.
Hi, let me just turn on my video for a second, just so that you can put a face to the name, as we usually say. Is that coming up? Somewhere. Okay. While the video is loading up, my name is Michael Joe Ali. I'm the Director for Teacher Development and Performance at the Sierra Leone Teaching Service Commission. I took over the position about exactly 8.5 months ago. It's been very interesting coming back from overseas to work in the education sector here. And one of the things that I have realized is the lack of access to educational material. So quite so often I do need something I can almost exactly image where it is on my bookshelves back in Canada or in Taiwan, where I've spent part of my career. And over here, it's really difficult. So I'm very excited to be in this workshop, discuss this further. And I'm also pleased to note that this effort is actually focused on developing countries. That's where the greatest needs are when it comes to access to educational materials. So without taking much of your time, I'd just like to let you know that I'm pleased to join you, and I hope that we can have a productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ali. It's a pleasure to have you join us. I don't know if Gloria Kamara is on. Is Gloria there?
From what I know, Gloria is in a workshop somewhere in the provinces.
Okay.
Currently, she could join from there, but I don't think I have the time to.
No worries at all. So we do see that Baimaro and Ezekiel. Baimaro, would you like to start, and then Ezekiel, your introductions?
Yes, I am Baimaro Koroma, and I'm the IT manager for Teaching Solution here in Sierra Leone.
Thanks, Baimaro, for joining us. Ezekiel?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Ezekiel, and I'm the manager for Teacher Performance at the Teaching Service Commission, Sierra Leone.
Okay. Thank you, Ezekiel. All right, so for Tanzania, I have Aneth, Saphinael, and then Professor Mtebe. So should we start with Aneth?
Yes, thank you. My name is Aneth Komba. I'm the Director General, Tanzania Institute of Education. The Institute is performing 4 key functions. The first one is to design and develop curriculum for pre-primary, primary, secondary, and teacher education. The second one is to write textbooks and other learning support materials for the same levels. And the third role is to provide in-service teacher training. And the last function is to conduct research and provide consultant services to government and other stakeholders on issues related to curriculum. I'm happy to be part of this discussion. I hope that this will help in increasing access of materials to our children in Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Komba. Saphinael, and then Professor Mtebe.
I am Saphinael from Tanzania, from the President's Office, Regional Administration and Local Government. I'm working with the Department of ICT. I am a statistician, and I'm happy to be here just to learn from others. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Mtebe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Mtebe from the University of Dar es Salaam. Currently, I work as the Director Center for Virtual Learning, the center that oversees the implementation and the use of education technology to enhance teaching and learning across the university, but also have been involved in several other projects that make use of ICT in enhancing teaching and learning at various levels of education. And recently, have been working with the EdTech as an technical assistant in trying to see how we can use education technology to enhance teachers' professional development in Tanzania. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot on how we can use OER, especially in the lower level of education in our country, primary and secondary education, as I've been involved in some projects of OER at a higher level of education. But now my interest is to see at what level we can adopt, and see what we can help our children out there through the use of OER. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mtebe. And finally, our colleague, Director Abinel from Philippines. Abram.
Hello, good evening. I'm Abram. I'm the director for the ICT service in the Department of Education in the Philippines. We handle the deployment of infrastructure and systems and also the ad hoc functions of the education technology, as well as production of video and radio-based lectures in our country.
Great, thank you, Abram. All right, Neil, I'm going to turn it over to you and Kirsty to kick us off with the actual policy dialogue. Neil, I understand you have some slides and would encourage people to, you could turn off your camera or mute at least, but if you have questions or comments, feel free to throw those into the chat for Neil and his colleagues. Over to you, Neil.
Thanks very much, Tony, and greetings everybody on the different time zones that you're in. We are slightly behind time. I don't think that's a problem. My intention here is to make a few introductory remarks with my colleague Kirsty, and then as we proceed through the slide presentation, there's actually a number of points where we stop and pose questions. The idea of this session, as I hope is clear, is to start a discussion or a dialogue between various experts and government decision makers to explore how we might develop policies that are more supportive of effective OER use. I'm very glad that we've started with a focus on foundational literacy and numeracy, also targeting teacher professional development and personalized learning, because I think these are matters that really illustrate why OER is such a powerful concept, but also why it's so important, and I think so very often misunderstood. So I just wanted to start with a very quick slide. I suspect that everyone already knows this, but just to remind us that OERs are teaching, learning and research resources that reside in the public domain or that have been released under an IP license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. In this space, that's mostly using the Creative Commons licenses. And the reason I always start with this observation is just to reinforce the point that actually at its core, the concept of open educational resources is, strictly speaking, a legal concept. It's really about the modification of copyrights to facilitate reuse and adaptation of educational content by others without requesting written permission. And I think that's a very important point to observe to start when we're thinking about policy, because I think we need to be very careful not to make the mistake of thinking that simply by facilitating the use of openly licensed resources, we're actually doing anything that will have a positive educational impact. And so I thought that it might be worth starting a policy discussion with a quick reflection on some of the things that I think have emerged from the 18 months since the COVID-19 pandemic began, because I feel very strongly that what the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us is several fault lines that exist in our education systems. And I really do believe that the concept of open educational resources offers us an opportunity to start tackling these problems. But conversely, I think that if we implement the concept poorly at the policy level, we might actually make the problems worse. So I think the first thing that we've seen from COVID-19 is just how damaging the rigid, over-structured and out-of-date curricula and excessive summative assessments are that we have in most education systems around the world. I can speak very strongly for the South African context where I am and where my children are both in school. And I observe there that I think, these are all policy elements of policy. Curricula are ultimately policy statements at the national level, and so are most of the national assessments and standardized assessments that are implemented by governments. And I think what we've seen is that the more marginalized people are, the harder it is actually for them to learn when there is a disruption of the kind that we've experienced with COVID-19. And this has led to growing inequalities in access, which have further closed down opportunities for learning. The other thing that's come through very clearly, certainly in the South African situation where I live, but which I'm seeing around the world as well, has been the extent to which we have human resource policies that actually try to micromanage educators in the classroom and try and tell them what to do almost every single step of the way through day-to-day practices and through very over-elaborated policies. For me, this I consider to be quite a dehumanizing aspect of education. And that's why I think focusing on teacher professional development in this policy clinic is so important. But where we have these over-elaborated policies, what I think has been shown very clearly from the last 18 months is that we have education systems that are very lacking in resilience in the face of crisis or change. And what COVID-19 has done is accelerated a number of global problems, disease management being the most obvious, but I think we're also starting to see very clearly the effects of climate change, challenges with food security, shifting employment being caused by the fourth industrial revolution, and so on. All of these changes are changes that demand cooperation at the international level. And this again is why the concept of open educational resources can be so powerful, because it can help us to create the open knowledge networks that are so essential to that international collaboration. Unfortunately, what I think we're seeing in our education systems and more generally is growing signs of isolation and closure around the world. And so I think it's very important when we start having a policy conversation about open educational resources that we understand the bigger educational context in which we're working. Because I think very importantly that we need to understand that open licensing is not by itself a meaningful proxy for openness in education. Openness comes by trying to improve access to educational opportunities, improve the quality of those opportunities when people are enrolled, making sure that there's greater opportunities for success after studies. So simply passing examinations, I think we've seen very clearly from the last 18 months, is not a good proxy for success after studying. As the fourth industrial revolution takes hold, we recognize that many of the curricula in our countries are actually not serving the purposes of our learners after they finish studying. And we equally realize that, that the teachers who are delivering those curricula actually lack the skills that they need to shift with those changes. And then I think another important aspect of openness is the issue of flexibility, which is why the concept of personalized learning is so important. Now, thankfully, at the foundational literacy and numeracy level, we tend to have the most open education. It tends to then get more closed from there. So I'm interested not only in how we can use open educational resources to support more effective foundational literacy and numeracy, but also what lessons we can learn from that could be applied into other elements of the system. Because the more I've worked in the space of OER, the more I've realized that open licensing can just as easily be deployed to entrench rigid or closed systems of education as it can to help create more open learning. So if, for example, we're just taking textbooks that are teaching the rigid structured curricula and very detailed lesson plans that dehumanize teachers, and we're putting open licenses to those, I actually think paradoxically that what we'll be doing is worsening the quality of education that our children receive in African countries and the Philippines and around the world, in fact, rather than creating more open learning. So I think when we're thinking from a policy perspective, we really need to be considering every policy decision against the real transformative effects on education that we might have. And this is something that I'll come back to as we unpack and explore the concept of the policies that you have in your countries and how they do or don't support real openness, and then also the use of OERs. But I wanted to just make those introductory remarks because I think it is really important that we understand that the concept of OERs is by itself not creating meaningful openness. We really need to be making sure that we're focusing on the transformation of our education systems and then looking at how OERs can support that transformation. So just turning over very quickly, and we've just got 2 more slides before we begin the conversation. We thought it might be useful just to share a couple of examples where the concept of OERs has been deployed successfully to enable more effective elements of teacher, in this case of teacher professional development. My colleague Kirsty will talk about a few examples in the literacy space and the personalized learning space. So the first example here is called Teacher Education in Sub-Saharan Africa, or TESA, which I think many of you may have heard of. This is actually an initiative started by the Open University in the United Kingdom, but which focused on the creation of a range of open educational resources that were linked to the school curricula, and that was explicitly supporting teachers to develop an active approach to learning. And I think this is where, for me, the example of transformative approaches to education becomes important. This wasn't simply teaching teachers to teach the curriculum in a very rote or rigid way. It was very actively focused on trying to empower them to strengthen their classroom practices, to make for more meaningful learning opportunities in the classroom. The resources that were developed were adapted to 10 different countries and made available in 4 languages. They're being used still across the continent in many different institutions. And they're also being used by schools. This included the creation of handbooks for teachers, training materials and activities, and were being used for both pre-service and in-service teachers, as well as being made available for offline use through download. And so I think this is a really excellent example of how the concept of open licensing can be used in a transformative way to create opportunities for countries and institutions to collaborate across national boundaries, to use the open licensing concept to facilitate translation of materials into multiple languages at much lower cost, and also in this case to create a collaborative network of developers who worked with each other across national boundaries to create high quality materials. And obviously this was driven by African institutions with the facilitation support of the Open University. So I think it's a really excellent example of effective use of OERs. So a question that I'll ask you to think about while Kirsty presents the next 2 examples, and then we'll get into some discussion, is to what extent are there similar kinds of OER practices taking place in your countries? I'll be asking you to share any examples that you have of how you're using OERs currently. And then we'll go into some discussion about whether or not the policy environment in which you're working is supporting this kind of use of OER. But first, we thought it'd be nice to give you just one example from a personalized learning perspective. So I hand over to my colleague Kirsty to talk about this very briefly.
So I selected Khan Academy for personalized learning just because I think it's quite well known, and it's very clear the link between personalized learning and what the project is trying to do. So Khan Academy is based on mastery learning. So learners are able to go at their own pace, which is what we look for in personalized learning. Khan Academy is aligned to the US Common Core standards, but learners can go in and teachers can also work on this program and understand where learners are lacking, what skills they need to be able to build a firm foundation to develop their numeracy skills, especially in the foundation phase. This program supports face-to-face and distance learning and teaching. So it is an online program ideally because it's supported with a lot of videos, but this does enable teachers to track learners' progress. It enables parents and caregivers to track learner progress, and it's available in 26 languages, which I think is quite important. And Khan Academy uses a CC by NC SA license. So of course, because it's video, it's not easy to adapt these, but they are available for sharing and at no cost to the user. And then the next one I just wanted to discuss was just some examples of open licenses that are used especially in the early literacy space. Licenses can go from very open, the CC BY license, to quite restrictive, CC BY NC ND. So the well-known examples are Storyweaver and African Storybook, which allow users to create storybooks and to download and adapt storybooks. So, and there's Bloom Digital Library also does this. So these are available in a lot of languages and are a useful tool for teachers. Then we've got the Global Digital Library, which allows CC BY and CC BY SA. And the Global Digital Library is actually, there are some governments that are working with the Global Digital Library to roll out storybooks. And then the last example is these storybooks, like Maltino has a graded reader series, and because they don't want their methodology changed, they've licensed it under a CC BY non-commercial, non-derivative license. So users can download it or access it online, but the content cannot be changed without the permission of Multino. And Ubongo creates multimedia content, which is aired, which is broadcast across a few African countries, and it's also CC BY NC ND, and just because they are, they've moved from a copyright model to open licensing for various reasons. But yeah, those are my examples. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. So just from the policy perspective, before we move on, I just wanted to reflect very briefly on a couple of the policy implications of what Kirsty's just said. It might not be lost on many people that the example we shared of Khan Academy is obviously from the global north. As it turns out, it was actually quite tricky for us to find a good example of a personalized learning initiative that actually used open licenses. So very often there were personalized learning initiatives that were available through websites, but the licensing conditions weren't clear that the resources were being shared under an open license that facilitated reuse or adaptation. This becomes important from a policy perspective because we need to check the extent to which our policy enables the application of those kinds of licenses. And then I think also in this last example that Kirsty has shared, we see that there's a very wide range of licenses that people have used in the first case with Storyweaver and African Storybook, to facilitate translation of storybooks into multiple languages, so that stories that have been produced in, say, Tanzania can be translated and employed for early literacy purposes in Sierra Leone, for example. And that's great. It enables lots of different kinds of opportunities. When we get to the bottom, we can see a much more restrictive license. And we understand why our colleagues at Multino have employed this license, because their methodology is very important and they want to make sure that it's protected. But obviously on the flip side, what that means is that it's harder for people to repurpose and reuse that content for educational purposes in other countries. So that would require some process of engagement. Again, though, what I think this point illustrates is that a one-size-fits-all approach to licensing does not necessarily work for the content creators. So if at a policy level, we try to enforce a single kind of open license, this might actually be counterproductive. It might be better for us to have a more open policy environment that facilitates the use of different licenses depending on different educational contexts and different educational needs. But I hope those examples provide some illustration of some of the possibilities of open educational resources in these areas. So what I thought we could do next is just open up for some discussion using the chat, or just inviting people to chip in and talk, because we're a small group, so I think there's no problem with people just starting to talk, to understand a little bit better about what's happening in your own countries or regions. Are there examples of OER activities that are taking place, say in Tanzania, the Philippines, or Sierra Leone, that you might be willing to share with us? And if so, could you possibly reflect on what you think might need to be done to scale up and sustain these initiatives? So let me open up very quickly to the group and see if people have some thoughts they'd like to share about OER practices in your countries. So please, if anyone has anything they'd like to share, please feel free to start talking. Any examples of OER use taking place in the various countries that we're discussing today? Okay. So I not seeing any hands. So let's maybe.
No, I can comment, Neil.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I'm actually just Googling now to see what exists in Sierra Leone, and I will take more time doing that rather than just come out and talk here. Being new in the country, I should say, I haven't heard, in fact, any talk, let alone to say much talk about open educational resources in Sierra Leone. I just Googling right now, and I've seen a couple of links, but I don't know where those are going to lead me. But I'm just thinking, with open educational resource, access to such resources has great implications for the reliable electricity. I believe it's not only Sierra Leone, a number of developing countries may be are probably in a similar situation. When you don't have the existence of libraries in communities, I mean, widely well-developed libraries that provide equitably for various regions of a country. We don't have reliable electricity supply. The vast majority of the country is not part of the grid that is in the city. And in fact, whatever grid is there may be in the main city and maybe three of the main cities. The country operates on private generators, so to speak. Now, so the idea of open educational resource is important, and it's a very vital means of creating access for mostly disadvantaged people and others. But how are we going to achieve that when the power that's required to access this resource is hard to come by?
Thank you, Michael. Those are really good points. I think to the issue of electricity, obviously, one of the powers of OERs is even though we're sharing resources digitally, the possibility does exist that many of them can be made available for printing and distribution, which is a significant way in which the concept of open education textbooks is, or open textbooks is trying to harness the concept of open licensing, which is assuming obviously that the end user won't have access to ICT devices and electricity. But I think you're raising a really important point, is that in many parts of the world where access to ICT and technology and even power is constrained, many of the power and potential of personalized learning, for example, is simply not going to be accessible to people. So we need to solve that problem in parallel with our other related processes. I think yes, please go ahead, Michael.
So in that regard, thank you, Neil, for your response. I'm just wondering, in terms of developing policies, we are envisaging policies, universal policies or country-specific policies, because what I am suspecting is that we're likely to going to find common challenges among a range of countries, while you find some countries that have specific challenges that may not be applicable to some other areas, even if you take Sub-Saharan Africa, for example. In terms of policies, what are we looking at?
So I'll welcome also inputs from our colleagues in Tanzania, who I'm sure will have many thoughts of their own. I'm also working with the World Bank in Tanzania at the moment, so I look forward to continuing this conversation with you all in Tanzania through the SECMIP project. But I think, Michael, to your question, our colleague Zeynep from UNESCO introduced the Oer Recommendation, which is obviously a global commitment from governments to advance the concept of open educational resources. And I think that it creates a space for international cooperation. I put that early slide on because I actually think that trying to develop policies at the regional level, at the global level, that facilitates that kind of international cooperation is really going to be essential in the coming years, because the challenges that we're facing demand cooperation between nations. But I also think that the practical reality from an educational perspective is still that policy is predominantly a national dispensation. And so I think we have to make sure that our policies start at the national level, and then that our national policies actually start talking about the importance of regional and global cooperation. I think if we just start from the perspective of assuming that regional or global policies will bind nation states to doing things, I think it's quite unlikely that that's going to lead to much progress. So I think the starting point is the national level. And then when we have frameworks like the UNESCO OER recommendation in place, you're from Sierra Leone, so obviously ECOWAS can play a role there in also creating a regional policy environment to which the national policies can connect. Zeynep and I are also working in the Sahel region at the moment to try and facilitate international cooperation between 3 countries in the Sahel region in the creation of francophone resources, because OERs in French are relatively few and far between. So that's a great opportunity for cooperation between countries. But if the national policies don't provide for that cooperation, my experience is that the regional policies hold very little weight, and unfortunately they tend to get very neglected. I don't know if that's a similar experience that you find in the West African context.
Yeah,
and I'd be interested
totally
also to hear from our
you.
colleagues in Tanzania and the Philippines.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil.
Yes, thank you. From Tanzania, I will speak from the Tanzania Institute of Education. We had a number of open educational resources initiatives. The institute developed the e-library, and there are a lot of materials that were loaded on the e-library, and a lot of link to some of the open educational resources that were presented, like the Kani Academy, the Ubungo, and the Global Digital Library. But again, what I can say, we also experienced similar problem like what has been presented by the previous presenter. There is a problem of power cuts, accessibility to ICT facilities and internet. So we noted that only few children, especially those who are located in urban areas, were able to access the open educational resources. And so what we did to make sure that all children get access to these materials, we decided to use a combination kind of approach. We presented the materials through radio, television, and we also distributed hard copies to children who are located in rural, remote areas. So in this way, at least majority of children were able to continue learning, especially during the period when the schools were closed. Otherwise, I think we are also experiencing similar problem. I mean, even if we will have access to open educational resources, it is hard to be sure that the materials will be accessed by a majority of children because of the problem which have been mentioned. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that example. As you were talking, I was just wondering if you might be willing to, or maybe some of your colleagues also from Tanzania, just to reflect very briefly then. I mean, it sounds like you've learned a lot from that process. If you then reflect on that from a policy perspective, can you maybe share with us any thoughts about what the extent to which the policy environment that exists within the Tanzanian context is supportive of that type of practice? Or are there changes that we need to be making to the policy environment in order to make that kind of activity easier to implement?
I think my colleague from Tanzania can help. I understand that Professor Joel Mtebe left the meeting, but I think the other colleague can help. But what I can say from my end is I understand that there are policies which support the use of open educational resources. We have the national ICT policies, and even the national education policy also supports the use of open education resources to enable children to learn. I'm wondering whether my other colleague from Tanzania can help. Maybe she's not around also.
Okay, and then we have been joined by John Kimotho from Kenya now, who is out of his engagement with the teachers about the curriculum structure in Kenya. It's very welcome, John. Maybe if you could just introduce yourself. We've just been sharing some examples of OER practices and challenges in different countries. And so maybe if you could just introduce yourself briefly and indicate where you're from within the Kenyan education system. And then if you have any examples that you would like to share from the Kenyan context, that would be great as well. Sorry to put you on the spot so quickly, but just to make you feel welcome.
Hello everyone. I just I just did my chat and I said hello and I misspelled something, so I want to begin by apologizing. But then I also give my greetings and regard to everyone because we are there in education, and unfortunately for us, education does not wait. So sometimes engagement come and though planned, they go beyond some hours. So I'm really apologetic for coming in late. I hand the Educational Media Directorate in Kenya that deals with basic education, levels of education from preachers below the university. Deal with all that, run a radio station, television station, and the Kenya education crowd, and all what pertains. That's who I am, and that is what I deal with. I don't know whether you also requested me to make my remarks from the Kenya point of view.
So I'll just, if you had any examples where you're already starting to use open educational resources or open licenses in the context of that work you've described that you might like to share with us, I think colleagues would love to hear about some of what you're doing.
No problem, and no need, I mean, to apologize that you got me so quickly, because this is what I do. This is what I do every day in terms of provision of learning materials for basic education. And the topic we are discussing today about open education resources in relationship to foundational numeracy and literacy is, to me, also an area that comes with a lot of sensitivity, because it is at that early learning that we need to be sure that the materials are helping in terms of curriculum implementation, that the materials are properly aligned, they have the right context. And what we really experience is that at those early years, to have material that is really responding and resonating to the curriculum of our region, in this case, East Africa, because KICD also, we work as the Center of Excellence for East African region. And we also have the principles of standardization of the East African curriculum. So to find materials that are really for the early years of numeracy and literacy, and that are contextually right, it is difficult.
So I think, unfortunately, John's feed has frozen. So we'll have to hear from him again when he comes back. But I think what he was illustrating there is some really essential points about making sure that OERs are aligned with the requirements of national curricula, and that the quality is very high, that it's not just a question of taking any openly licensed resources and making them available in the context. And I think that that's where policy becomes so important. It either facilitates and supports that kind of alignment and quality improvement, or alternatively, it can potentially just make provision for all openly licensed materials, regardless of any quality processes, to become accessible through the education system, which is something I have seen in various countries. Taskeen, I see you've added a little note there indicating that the implementation of CPD in Tanzania is going to be drawing on TPD OERs to build modules for teachers. That's an initiative I'm also aware of. Are you able to tell us just a little bit more about that process, and particularly the extent to which that process is in fact supported in any direct way by any policy reform that's taking place around the Tanzania Institute of Education or the CPD, human resource policies of the country, to actually make sure that that type of approach is supported by policy rather than just something that's happening at the project level. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, Neil. I think Dr. Aneth would probably be better placed to talk about this than me, as they're working more directly with all of this. But I guess just from my side and the support that we've been giving from EdTech Hub, we have been looking at existing OERs that have either been used in Tanzania with respect to teacher professional development, for example, Equip T projects, We've also been looking at OERs from other contexts. I also posted in the chat a little bit about LeviLearn in Sierra Leone that have open educational resources. But the idea is that this process has also been built into the new TPD implementation plan, the national implementation plan that is going to be rolled out for new teacher professional development models, probably starting early next year. So the idea is that we can draw on these different open educational resources to build these TPD modules for teachers going forward and integrate them into the community of learning. So kind of what you're saying, Neil, like these resources could just be something static, but unless they integrate it into a bigger plan of how to use them effectively, that's what really matters. So just drawing back on what John said, integrating things locally is also about taking the materials and using them locally within the local context so that they can be a platform for discussion. So something might be a generic topic, but when you discuss it locally, for example, large classroom sizes, or how do teachers deal with that? When you bring that into a discussion space and a bigger picture plan, it can be much more effective. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you very much, Taskeen. Dr. Aneth, please feel free also to add to that. I see, John, we have you back now. Maybe it's better to leave your video off for now. Okay, but you were just telling us a little bit about how your unit is responsible for, if I understood correctly, for publishing open educational resources that are aligned with the curriculum and making sure that the quality of those resources was at a sufficient level to ensure effective teaching in the classroom. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about the extent to which the policy environment is enabling that kind of work? Do you, for example, have open licensing policy frameworks that mandate the use of open licenses? From a financial perspective, is there a regular flow of money coming through the national budget to support that work? Or are there still policy challenges that you're grappling with to try to sustain that work and scale it better? Or is that already in place in Kenya?
Thank you, and also sorry for that. It was a major power outage around that cut of the internet. Nevertheless, we are here, and therefore be very quick and smart in this. What we did is realizing that there isn't much available in terms of materials that are directly useful in the curriculum, only a retro, we wanted teachers to really enjoy using this. We trained a number of teachers on how to use open education resources, to be able to use them, to see them and contextualize them in a way that they become useful in the classroom. Besides that, also developed standards. If you now go to our website, you're going to find standards for open education resources. So with that, then the teacher is able to look at that, contextualize it, and be able to use them. That gives them that opportunity to be able to, and we actually did this together with UNICEF so that we were able to take it forward and take it to another mile. There is continuous flow of funds, yes, from government, in terms of how to provide digital content, not necessarily open education resources. But the beauty of it is that those funds, when they provide content, when they provide some course for teacher continuous learning or development, then it is available for free. Only that one cannot pick it and start working on it again. And therefore we have content available for all levels of education ourselves, grade 1, 2, 3, and 4 in terms of competency-based curriculum, and the other levels in terms of objective-based curriculum that we had in the past. They're available for both the interactive digital content, the radio lessons, and the TV lessons. So that's how far we are, and we continue to engage. We are even going on to have another portal facilitated by our government, where we are going to look for a lot of the open education resources and be able to put there. So in terms of policy, we can say we are well guided. We need to really institutionalize and develop them, but we feel supported in that area by our government. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, John. And I think this is exactly the purpose of this this dialogue is to enable sharing between countries. So to hear what you're doing in the Kenyan context and compare it with what we heard from our Tanzanian colleagues as far as the teacher CPD is concerned, I think there can be a lot of lessons that can be learned from the experience that you've had so far. Without wanting to put other colleagues on the spot, we've got two other countries participating, one from the Philippines and from Ghana. So Abram, I'm just calling people out because we're a small group. I don't know if you have any particular context or examples to share maybe from the Philippines, which is a very different context. It's a place I've only visited twice. So I know very little about the Philippines, but maybe you can share some of your experiences with us.
Well, one of the things that we've been doing is conducting a lot of teacher trainings on how to develop their own respective contents and or essentially open educational resources. We actually trained around 514,000 last March, and then just this August 31, we conducted another series of trainings for 600,000 teachers. We are able to do this because we were able to release a learning management system where we could essentially deploy training programs at scale. It's incredible how useful this learning management system is as a tool for teacher training. It's extremely cheap in terms of deploying teacher training using this particular platform. And again, we could easily reach right now 73% of our teaching population using this platform already. And there's very minimal in terms of human resources. What we do is we just pre-record all the video lectures, put it into the learning management system, and have require a test for them to get a certificate of participation for this. And most of our content is on, for example, developing their own ebooks, developing their own video lectures, and creating rich multimedia for using ICT tools. So that's one. Then next, what we did last March was we also deployed what we call the DepEd Commons. This is a platform where teachers would upload whatever materials or resources that they develop on their own and to share with other teachers. Our first experience with this was quite good, no? But in later months, we had a big problem because some of the content of our teachers had very, very glaring errors. So we really had to stop publications of these materials because we were getting attacked by media for this for some of these errors. Now we also have been doing a lot of production in terms of video lectures, which are done by my office. We actually mobilize around 300 of our best teachers to become teacher broadcasters, and they produce video lectures for all our competencies. We've actually completed the competencies for the first quarter, and we're in the process of producing for the second up to the fourth quarter. And one of the, I think, more incredibly important game-changing things in this project is that we will be embedding Filipino Sign Language in all of the video lectures, and then all of the TV scripts will be revised to factor in the possibility, the situation where students would not be able to see any visuals. So they this would be converted into audio format for delivery in radio based instruction, as well as for use of our blind learners. And then we're also going to be dubbing all of the video lectures in 3 different dialects. There are 19 dialects in our country, but in the future we'll be converting them as well into the other dialects. So that's 2. And then finally, we're also working on print-based self-learning modules. These are a bit different from the these are again, we mobilize teachers who are good writers, in order to produce these self-learning modules. So these are quality assured by our Bureau of Learning Resources through their own process. The problem that we've had is that originally we uploaded this in DepEd Commons where everyone could access, but eventually we decided to just upload it inside our learning management system where only public school students can access, primarily because there were concerns that some of our self-learning modules might have copyright issues from the private publishers. So at least if we upload that in our learning management system, we can trace what would be our accountabilities to the textbook, private textbook publishers. Then finally, one of the last initiative that we had, given that we already had trained so many teachers on how to do content development, we also conducted a contest for the teachers to prepare open educational resources. And actually this October 2, we will be announcing the awards for around 504 materials that will be given awards for this October 2. Yeah, so those are our major issue. The big problem really is first, quality assurance. It is major bottleneck, and then of course the copyright issues is also something that we really have to take into account.
Thank you so much for that. I think, I'll just emphasize a couple of quick points from what you've said there. I think the really interesting one that you've added, and I see Taskeen is making some comments and linking us also to eKitabu, which is from the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, is the issue of sign language and the potential that open licensing introduces for being able to modify resources so that they're more accessible for students with special learning needs. But I'm glad also that you emphasized the challenge of quality assurance at the end there, and I think that really does emphasize the point that when we're thinking about the introduction of open licensing in OERs, this has a number of policy implications, and thinking carefully through the quality assurance processes that will accompany that is going to be very important, as is, of course, as you observed, the issue of copyright. Do our policy and legislative environments actually give clear guidance around the issue of copyright and what can be done under certain circumstances, and also making sure that that's done in a way that is fair to the content creators? One of the things that we've observed is that sometimes the implementation of open licensing serves to undermine the viability or sustainability of educational content creators. And in the long term, obviously, that's going to cause problems, because if we don't have a good base of materials developers who are being sustained to do their work, then in the long run, quality assurance will become a problem again. So I think you've highlighted some great initiatives, but also illustrated some of the key policy implications that arise from those initiatives. We also have our colleague, Dr. Adwabour from CENDLOS in Ghana. So just to see if there's any, possibly some observations from the Ghanaian context that you'd like to share, both in terms of interesting initiatives that are underway there that colleagues might like to hear about. Also, what the policy challenges are that you're experiencing in a Ghanaian context that might be useful for us to consider in this context. Sorry to pounce on you, but I just want to make sure that every country's had an opportunity to provide an input and as we proceed with the process.
All right, thank you so much. And in Ghana, I think we know the importance of OER, and we know how it's very beneficial to teachers, especially this time we are in, and how it's beneficial to other stakeholders. So we are working very hard to make sure we have a national policy that covers OER. In the interim, we have some silos of approach. One of them is we have the iCampus, we have the Edmodo, we have the iBox. All of them is learning management system. One, the iBox is an offline learning management system which does not use anything connectivity. So we put educational contents on there. So students and teachers can use to blend to support their teaching activities on campus. The iCampus depends on internet. So that one, anybody can log on it. Once you have the access and the login credentials, you should be able to get on it. And the Edmodo too is also a supporting part of OER in Ghana. But recently we are working with UNESCO to develop a national OER portal, which we have started working on that project. I think the consultant working doing that hand in hand. They have started the framework and they are almost through. We are also doing research on other countries, what they have done over the years, like Zimbabwe and other places, United States and other places. So research is ongoing to make sure that we put the right contents and other stuff that will support the teachers and all the stakeholders to get whatever they want. We want to have that balance. We don't want to put any content that will not, yield the results we want. We're also keeping an eye on the copyright issues. We want to make sure that everything we put here, we will pay attention to the license and other stuff, because copyright is very aggressive in Ghana here. It's something that we don't take it lightly, especially if it's not for a fair use, So we keeping an eye on that. So that one is going on. And Ghana is hoping to establish an open university Ghana. And we are working with Open University UK. So with that, we know we have to fall heavily on our open educational resources, because if you are going to do Open University Ghana, then you need to consider open educational resources. So that is why we wanted to take an ardent measures to make sure that OER is a national policy. We have a national platform for that teachers and other stakeholders can pounce on it anytime they need to have an access to any educational content. So we can support them to build their syllables, not from the scratch, so they can also support in teaching and other stuff. So basically right now we are following on the recommendations from UNESCO and building a portal for them. We have consultants working now, conducting research in all the countries and the universities and pre-tertiaries and other areas to give us feedback, which areas we have to work hard, we need to focus and other stuff. So these consultants are out there working, and CENDLOS too, we have people here that are working with the consultants on the field. UNESCO too has been, getting involved with whatever we have to do so we can have the policy and the recommendations come up as soon as possible. So Ghana, basically, that is where we are, and we hope to pick some of the useful information here to support what we are doing so we can get it done as soon as possible. In terms of timelines, we hope to have the national platform ready by the end of this year. That is what we hope to do. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I've unfortunately received input from our colleagues at mEd Alliance that we do need to wrap this session up sharply at half past the hour, because the next session starts. So we unfortunately started a little late, so I had one or two more slides to go through. I'm just going to wrap up very quickly and then hand over to Molly to close the session. But just to I think this has been a great introductory conversation between different countries that really shows that we have a lot to learn from each other. In this slide, I've just tried to emphasize a couple of the key questions that we might want to consider as we proceed, whether we want integrated or standalone policies, whether we're investigating our existing policies to assess the extent to which they facilitate openness or closure. If we have standalone OER policies, it's often the case that they contradict other policies that are already in place. Then looking at issues around education practice, intellectual property, procurement policies are really very important as well. So if I just flip to the next slide very quickly, here's a list of some of the kinds of cost factors that may need to be considered in OER implementation, as we're hearing from colleagues about the importance of quality assurance, translation, adaptation. These all carry costs that need to be integrated. It was great to hear from the Kenyan context that that's already built into government budgets, which I think is something we should try to achieve at the policy level. And then lastly, we also need to be thinking about how we monitor the effectiveness of all of this. So we put together a few examples of kinds of monitoring indicators that you might like to be considering. But I think what we've done today is really just emphasize that the policy discussion really has to happen hand in hand with the implementation of OER initiatives. It's very often the case, and I think we even hear that a little bit today, that the initiatives are running ahead of the policy development, which is not a bad thing, but we want the policy environment to catch up and to support those innovative educational practices as best as possible. And hopefully this is just the beginning of a conversation that we can continue over the course of the next few months to support our colleagues where they are trying to develop policy. At CENDLOS in Ghana, if we can help you with that process, we'd be very happy to do that. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague Molly to wrap up. I'm sorry that it's such a rush, but we've only got, she said she only needed a minute or two. So Molly, over to you just to close the conversation.
Thanks, Neil.
We can see how to take it forward from there.
Thanks, Neil. And it was great to hear from all of you today. I will keep it short, which is to say that I think today, as Neil said, was a great starting point to try to unearth what are some of the common challenges. We sort of started by talking about macro challenges like connectivity, and then talking about how we can address those by looking at combined approaches. Heard some examples about print and digital, both facing the child, but also looking at teachers' access to open educational resources too. So I think we've identified kind of several possible areas that we might dig into in subsequent sessions together, where we might be able to kind of facilitate additional peer learning between countries, but get a little bit more specific on some of the nitty-gritty issues. So what we hope to do is follow up with you all individually to get a sense of how we can be supportive of your efforts and how we can facilitate learning from experiences you've heard about today from other countries in more depth. And so stay tuned for outreach from us to hear about what you think would be useful next steps, to make sure that today is just the beginning of a longer conversation where we can get into the nuts and bolts together. As Neil mentioned, we'd be really happy to support all of the countries who have presented and shared about their experiences today and how they can continue to create the right policy environment and implementation effectiveness when it comes to OER. So that's it from us. Thank you so much. All of you have incredibly busy schedules and critical jobs, supporting teachers, supporting students, and the fact that you took time to spend it with us this morning means a lot. So thank you for being with us, and we will be in touch soon.